Welcome to this week's episode of the ASF Scots in Us. I'm Camilla Hellman, and I'm delighted this week that we will be highlighting the Scottish North American Community Conference, which recently convened in Alexandria, Virginia on December the 6th and 7th over the weekend of the Alexandria Christmas Walk. The conference, now in its 22nd year, is organized by the Chicago Scots, the American Scottish Foundation, the Council of Scottish Clans and Associations, the Detroit St. Andrews Society, the St. Andrews Society of Toronto, and Scottish Studies of Guelph. As we begin 2025, we felt there was one panel in particular that was especially pertinent in our exchange of ideas and mission to support and share our love of Scotland. The panel we focus on this episode is Highland Games, Challenges and Ways Forward. Moderated by Gus Noble, who heads up the Chicago Scots and the Chicago Highland Games, the panel included leading organizations who host some of our leading Highland Games in the US and Canada. The discussions were a very open and honest discussion of challenges and ideas, and some that we hope you will find as helpful as all of us present did. Panelists included Terry Wilkes of the New Hampshire Highland Games, Brendan Fife of St. Andrews, Toronto, speaking of the Fergus Games, Alexandra Duncan of the Virginia Highland Games, Bob Giles of the Detroit Highland Games, and Kimberly Bradford from St. Andrews, Los Angeles, who is involved in the various Southern California Games. And so now let's join SNACC 2024 Highland Games panel.
I'm delighted to welcome Terry, Alexandra, Bob, and Brendan on Zoom. And is that Mike as well that I can see there?
Yes, it is.
Could I ask for you just to raise your thumbs if you can hear us in the Zoom room? Grand. Thank you. Joining me on stage are Terry from New Hampshire and Alexandra from here in Virginia. And what we're going to talk about is our Scottish festivals and Highland Games. I'd sent out some questions to our panelists today so that we can begin from a perspective of looking at each of our events. And those questions are related to the background on each of the Highland Games. What makes your event unique? What have been the highlights you have celebrated and challenges you have faced in recent years? Have you seen growth or decline of your event? And do you have reasons to be cheerful or fearful about the future of your event and why? So let me start, if I could, with Terry, who is the CEO of the New Hampshire Scots. Yes, please use that microphone.
So Loon Mountain started, well, it's actually the New Hampshire Highland Games and Festival, started as a clan picnic, a Murray clan picnic in 1975. And I can't imagine a clan picnic, but they had a pipe band. And the next year they said, wouldn't it be fun if we could have a Highland dance competition? And it grew into what it's become today. And we'll be celebrating our 50th birthday next year, which is nowhere near what Bob is doing, but we hope we get there someday. I think the thing that's most special about our games that we hear from people is our location, because our location looks like Scotland. So even as we look at potential other locations to have our games within New Hampshire, we are looking to be up in the mountains so that people feel like they are still in Scotland. Something that we probably shouldn't be, we're not proud of this, but we are probably the most expensive Highland Games in the US. We have to bus in all 37 to 40,000 people that we have. Except Camilla, we let her park on site. But most people have to ride a shuttle. That's expensive. We don't have a lot of buildings, so almost everything we have takes place in tents. That's expensive. So it's an expensive games to produce, and we have to make it expensive for people to cover our costs. I will also say, as an organization, we have paid staff. Many organizations that run Highland Games do not, and should be very proud of where they are, because I think We are where we are because we do have a paid staff. And I can't imagine the difficulty of doing it without a paid staff. One of the most difficult things we had to face was in 2023, we had to cancel for the very first time besides COVID. We didn't cancel when 9/11 happened. We couldn't bring judges in. They were all in flights headed over because, of course, that games are in September. But New Hampshire has some of the strictest tent regulations in the country, along with California and New York, because we've had deaths from tents falling on people. So we have to have ballast for tents. We can only have people in tents with winds under 22 miles an hour gusts. That is the law, with the amount of ballast that we currently use. So we knew it was actually Hurricane Lee was coming up the coast, and we had to cancel the games on Saturday because we knew that we were going to be experiencing winds of 30 miles an hour or more. We had got a lot of pushback from people for canceling because outside of Loon Mountain, it didn't seem bad, but they were telling people not to hike in the forest because the trees could fall on them. And we had several tents move many feet, and we had one tent collapse because it was, I learned a lot about slope side wind, which I did not know about previously. We are very fortunate to have generations of people, and this is something that I've heard when I've collaborated with other games. They don't have that. They don't have generations of families. We have generations of families volunteering for us. We have generations of families coming to compete with us. It's amazing. And I think that that's also part of our success.
Thank you very much, Terry. I think what we'll do, Alexandria, if it's all right, I'll go to Bob. As you rightly observed, Terry, Bob is representing the Detroit Scots, who have the oldest and longest running Highland Games in America, I think in North America. And Bob has been a great friend to all of us in this community conference for many years. It's great to see you at the Kilgour Centre there, Bob. And please tell us those 4 questions. What makes your event unique? What have been the highlights you've celebrated, challenges you've faced in recent years? Have you seen growth or decline? And do you have reasons to be cheerful or fearful about the future of your event, and why?
Okay. Yes. So, yes, buses are expensive. Tents are expensive. Bands, for the entertainment tent are getting more expensive. Everything is expensive. And it's been very hard to budget this year. This is the first year in many years that, we actually may show a loss. Which is, quite unusual for us. But what makes us, I think, interesting is the longevity. We are the oldest continuous Highland Games, not the oldest continuous. And next year we will have our 175th Highland Games. And so it's an issue of probably one of the biggest problems and challenges we have right now is advertising. The more conventional ways of advertising are disappearing. Television, radio, newspapers, that, you used to appear on TV or you used to have a nice story in the newspaper. So promoting has been an issue. So a lot of the people there have been there in years past, and that's good. What we like to do is talk about that being as a tradition. The other issue we have that is kind of big, going to be bigger here, is the last 20 years we've had it in a historic village called Greenmead in Livonia. It's a huge area. Once was a farm, and a lot of the beautiful buildings in this, as this community suburb was developed, were moved to this one little area. So you have an old historic church, you have an old historic general store, and so forth. So it's a great environment to have these games. The problem is the city is starting to realize what a great opportunity this is to expand and use things like put a new ice rink in here. Let's do this, let's do that. And so having all this great land to do our games is now shrinking. So that's going to be a challenge we have right now. And of course, budgeting is always an issue. The games chairman we've had for the last actually 25 years, who succeeded me, is resigned this year, and she's, done a great job. Do we have a new games chairman? So we're helping her, trying to learn out the ins and outs of being a games chairman, which is not easy. But it's an all volunteer organization. We have about 400 volunteers who work an entire week to set it up and tear it down, and we always get good vibes from people.
So what I was saying is we're the complete opposite to the incredible run that Bob and the Detroit team have had, which is that Toronto had a Highland Games that kind of was disappeared in the 70s. And as part of rejuvenating our society, we've started up a games again. And it started this year, this September, and we did it in partnership with the St. Patrick's Society. So in Toronto, both people of Scottish heritage and Irish heritage, there's about 250,000 of each, and probably about 1 million in the Greater Toronto area. So space is really at a premium in Toronto. It's very expensive because the city has grown so quickly. And but we found a spot to do it on Toronto Island, and we sold out our first event with 1,000 people. So one of the things that's unique about the challenges in Toronto is that there are lots of Highland Games in the surrounding area. But because the cost of living crisis here, a lot of younger people in particular no longer have vehicles. They're pretty much dependent on city transit, and asking them to drive a couple hours out of town isn't really high on their priority list. So we wanted to do something to appeal to our younger potential members. And Toronto Island is just a short ferry ride from the shores of the city. And I think as far as what the future is, we're incredibly optimistic. We're super happy to get it going again. And mid-September makes a lot of sense for us on the Irish side because it marks halfway to St. Patrick's Day. And for us on the Scottish side, it helps us to recognize September 15th in 1773, which was the landing of the ship Hector in what is now Nova Scotia, and marked one of the first very significant Scottish immigrations to what is now Canada. So, very pleased to be, my heritage is half Irish and half Scottish as well. So like most Canadians, it's mixed. And, we're really optimistic and looking forward to keeping it going.
Very much, Brendan. 4 questions I'm going to now put to Kimberly. So we'll go from north of the border to sunny California, where Kimberly's calling from. And Kimberly, those questions again are: what makes your event unique? What have been the highlights you've celebrated, challenges you've faced in recent years? Have you seen growth or decline? And do you have reasons to be cheerful or fearful about the future of your event?
So the Seaside Highland Games have been around for about 20 years now. October marked its 20th anniversary. So the highlight, or something that I think really works in the favor of the Seaside Games, is that it has an amazing location. It's on the beach, pretty much in Ventura. Hence the name Seaside Highland Games. And so I mean, they have a lot going for them, and I'll get to the challenge for them in a moment. But so the great thing, it's Seaside, and about 10 years ago, St. Andrews, LA was going to come in and co-sponsor, and we did, but we wanted to take over the games. They were not open to that at the time, but 10 years later, they are open to it because they've been struggling. Unlike the first person on here, I believe the New Hampshire Games, God bless her, that you pay your people that work for you and all of that. Seaside always tries to do everything by volunteers. So I don't think they put as much effort monetarily into things, and I think they're now learning that they needed to do that. So they are now seeing a decline in guests, or people going to it. They have about 25,000 a year that go to their games, but this last October, I think it dwindled down to 17,000 for the 2-day weekend. So I had resigned from their board about 6 months ago, and then came back at the last minute in October to help them with marketing, just because they didn't have anybody. So I think what their challenge is making themselves relevant again. They need to cater to families. I think all Scottish games, all festivals need to cater to families with children. I'm sure everybody sees that the participation of people that come to these festivals are families. So I think that's a major challenge, is for them to get the word out. But you can do that easily on social media. I think it was Bob that was mentioning earlier, a lot of the older forms of advertising are now becoming obsolete, magazines, newspapers, things of that nature. So I think doing both types of marketing is imperative. I do want to say this, that interestingly, and I think we should all look into this, is last year, by no fault of the Seaside Highland Games, the venue, the Ventura County Fairgrounds, they accidentally booked on one of the days a country western concert. And that turned out to be a godsend for that Sunday of the games, because it was virtually a demographic that they hadn't really tapped into. So I would say, as far as knowing your demographic, but also take a chance on other options. So I think advertising and social media promotion with demographics that you may not necessarily think that might come to your games. I think trying everything nowadays is worth it. I know none of us wants to reinvent the wheel, which I don't think there is any need to. But sometimes you get surprises, like the country western concert people, and there were probably about 40,000 people at this concert. So it actually helped with overflow from there to the Sunday of the Seaside Highland Games. And did I answer all of the questions right? Hopefully, Gus.
You did, yes, Kimberly, and I should, echoing what Henry said earlier, how the Scots invented the modern world. Country music is Scottish anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll stay on Zoom so we can hopefully eliminate as many of the sound issues as possible, and come to you, Mike, and then I'll ask Alexandra to talk about the games in Virginia. So over to you, Mike, please.
And your question for me was about what the various clan societies try to do in terms of participating in games and why we do it. And certainly with Clan Donaghy, it's our one way of meeting. We, especially with COVID, we were unable to meet. And when we reopened after COVID, we found that the one way we could actually continue to meet with our members and find new members was that really the only way we were doing it was through attendance at as many Highland Games as possible. And there do seem to be more Highland Games in the northeastern United States. So we've been trying to find out which ones seem to be the most effective. Some were pretty lightweight in terms of being not really more about fantasy and game stuff, not really athletics games, but silly stuff. So we sort of opted out of those. We were interested in ones that were more family oriented, more athletics oriented, more things that had more cultural things like music and dance. So we were a little picky in terms of not choosing all of them, but we certainly have expanded since COVID because there are more games now. And unfortunately, we've had a few that have stopped. Long Island Games seems to have stopped. It's now a Celtic Games. Haven't met a single person who went there. We were unable to go, and one game's in Connecticut canceled, but there's another one in its place. So we're experimenting with new places to participate. We find a real great way to reach out to new members is through Alex's mother's shortbread recipe, which actually is from one of the cookbooks called The Scottish Kitchen. And it's very popular because people know they can come to our tent and get wonderful shortbread, homemade shortbread. And so that's part of our branding, is that we always have shortbread. We sometimes participate in the shortbread contest too, but we definitely give it away. And I think that's, so it's both, we use the games to bring in new members and to reach out to our current members, really those primary purposes. And to help people find out what tartans they should wear, or find out if they are part of a clan. We help people investigate what they want to be in terms of what they may be in terms of being having Scottish roots.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
That's it.
I'm going to turn to Alexandra, who's waited patiently to tell us all about the Highland Games here in Virginia.
Well, I will say we are pretty well represented here today by Virginian people, which is great, and by the Scottish American Women's Society. That is a very new partner for us. They're new to existence, but they are also new to the games. And this year, one of our fortunes and one of our things that makes us unique is we had a gin tasting this year for the first time. And it was sponsored by the Scottish American Women's Society, and we featured all women-owned Scottish or women master distiller gins from
Wow,
Scotland,
great.
which was hard to do, and also brought us to work with Impex Beverages. We talked about collaboration, and that's who we've been collaborating with. But one of the other things that makes us unique is the East Coast Championships. We host the men's championship. You have to have won an event east of the Mississippi, and in the last 2 years, and we've been hosting that for over 25 years, I think, at this point, for athletics. There are championships all over. This is just a unique one, and they've piggybacked off of this, and there's an East Coast Women's Championships now held down south. But for us, we are horrendously positive about what's going on. We have had higher attendance the last 2 years than we've had in a long time. We find space to be continually a challenge, but we are working over it, working around it. And I think that one of the things we've taken from New Hampshire is bringing in a chef to be a guest speaker. We can't do like you've done with cooking demonstrations, but we had the Hebridean baker on site this year, also sponsored by SAWS. And he had 9 sold out presentations, which was fantastic considering he gave away no food and just tiny little shots of gin or whiskey. So, but for a 50-year-old festival, I think we're doing pretty well, and we are increasing every year, which I find fantastic.
Thanks, Alexandra. I'll say a couple of words about Chicago, if I could. And like New Hampshire, we brought in the national chef for Scotland, Gary McLean, to do some cooking demonstrations. But while I'm mentioning Gary, I should tell you something that happened in Chicago at the beginning of last year. It was the 300th anniversary of the birth of Adam Smith. So we had a leading academic come over and talk to us about what the world looked like through the eyes of, in 2024, what it would look like through the eyes of Adam Smith. Fascinating discussion. But we said to Gary, would you cook a meal for 70 guests at this very nice club in Chicago? And he said, sure, I'll do 5 courses. I'll come out and introduce each course, how engaging he is. So the second course was haggis. And I said, chef, we haven't got anybody to address the haggis. It would be really improper to serve it if we don't address it properly. And he said, yeah, you're right. I could make a little chieftain and we'll bring it out. Didn't have a piper. So Jack Crombie, who many of you may know, he owns Chicago's only, or as he says, Chicago's best Scottish pub. It's because it's the only one, but that's beside the point. But Jack is no shrinking violet. So he was the bagpiper without bagpipes. And he walked in and I said to Jack, let's do the address to the haggis as a duet. We'll have some fun. You do a line, then I'll do a line. So this is what we resolved to do. And it got to the second verse, his knife see rustic labor dick. And I grabbed the knife, moved it over to the sleeve of my jacket to clean it, but my finger was in the way. And I sliced the end clean off my finger. On this brand new floor that had been laid in this club, I began to drip blood. And I'm a baby when it comes to the sight of blood. So I've 75 sets of eyes are looking at me, and adrenaline kicked in, and I got through the verse. At this point, the manager of the club comes bounding over and says, "My car's parked out front. I'll take you to the hospital to have your finger stitched up." But there was a young tennis professional from Scotland in this club, and he came running across the room and said, "Don't leave." There were tennis courts upstairs, and he said, "There are 2 surgeons playing tennis upstairs." So I ran up, and they came off the court and went into surgeon mode and basically said, "There is nothing left of your finger to stitch, but we'll patch you up." And they gave me this big bandage, and they said, "You must keep it pointed towards heaven." This thing looked like a giant light bulb stuck on my finger. And you probably should keep it above your heart, and you're going to need a couple of extra whiskeys by way of pain management. So I walked back into the room, everybody applauded, and I got to finish my haggis with those whiskeys. And I then had to moderate a session about the 350th birthday of Adam Smith and what the world looked like through his eyes. It was the most surreal evening. Sorry, I went on there. Our Highland Games. We moved our Highland Games this year to a new location. And location, it matters, because we lost close to $75,000 at our Highland Games in 2023. This year we made $50,000. So that was a $120,000 turnaround, largely because of the venue. We went to county fairgrounds, and they had, we had the ability to buy wholesale rather than retail from them. So the tents we needed, they owned. All the chairs, the stage, etc. It really, really helped us. We hosted the largest bagpiping championship in North America, and we had over 1,000 pipers playing together at the end of the event. And our honored clan this year was not actually a clan, or it depends if you think about it. They are a clan if a clan is defined by shared values. For only the second time in history, Rotary International, which is the world's largest service organization, 3 million Rotarians around the world, was the president was from the borders of Scotland. He lived in Evanston, Illinois. So I asked him if he would accept the salute to the chieftain, and Rotary International was our honored clan. That brought Rotarians out from all over. It was a really smart thing that my team suggested. Incidentally, as another aside, Rotary is really, really Scottish. Paul Harris, the man who started it, famously said, "What we are trying to do in Rotary is make the words of Robert Burns come true." And he quoted "a man's a man" for all that. So it made a lot of sense. He gave some really interesting remarks. We've shared some ideas there. So let's kind of lean into collaboration and learning. Over the years at the Chicago Scots, we've improved our event by going to school on some of the people I'm sitting with now. Terry at New Hampshire, Bob and Peg at the Detroit Scots in particular, and we've added content and attractions that we've learned about through visiting and speaking with other games. Can you talk about whether you've learned from other games, and how did this happen? Did you visit with them, or did you simply talk on the phone? And are there opportunities that we're missing for future collaboration? I'll start with you, Terry, again, please.
I do. We actually budget about $5,000 a year for staff and board members to visit other games and other organizations' events. It is important to learn from each other.
Yeah.
And I've called you.
Yeah.
We did masterclass whiskey tastings, but they had a tent that ran differently. And I actually now have both because I learned from them. I think that I've borrowed something from every single game that I've visited. Some games I wish I had as much space as they had, because space is always an issue. I'd like to do more. I'd like to have every dog that you had at your parade today. I would like to have at my game. I'm
Yeah.
totally a dog person, but I don't know where we would put them. So, yes, you need to talk to other people, listen to other people, get ideas from other people. I've been surprised by some organizations that I've reached out to for information that they're not willing to share. It is kind of strange that that does happen, but it does happen. At one point, we were contacted by the Rhode Island Games. Our steward for the piping and drumming competition was also theirs, and he called me and said, if you can't help them, they're going to close.
Mm.
And so we gave them everything. We gave them our list of clan addresses. We gave them our list of vendors so that they could contact all of these people and ask them to come to their games. We gathered volunteers and bussed them down to Rhode Island, which was 3 hours away from where we usually are. So it wasn't easy for a weekend to help them. In the end, they closed. It wasn't because of money. It was really because of infighting, which is even more disappointing. Because I think we do and can learn from each other.
I will stay in the room this time. If Alexandra, we could talk about collaboration and what you may have learned from others.
Well, I cut my teeth at New Hampshire Scottish Games, so I've learned a lot from them, but I've been to Alaska, to the Celtic Classic frequently, a number of other games, SS Park, and from everywhere I go, I've learned a lot, but VSG is also a member of the Association of Scottish Games and Festivals, which has been great, pardon me, great for networking and great for meeting with people and learning about what they do. The most recent takeaway I've had from there has been ticketing, because we did not, up until a few years ago, did not do any online ticketing. We are now on our third platform because I dislike them all. And I'm the one that ends up doing all the programming. But we continue to collaborate with other games. We collaborate with SAW, we collaborate with St. Andrews, and we're starting a collaboration with Washington Tattoo to also get our message out and their message out a little bit more. And we have always been welcome to have any other festival come to our games as our guests. I'm not paying your airfare, I'm not paying your lodging, but you can come in the gate for free. And, we will chat with you as much as we can. And we do share vendors lists. I will not give you my patrons list, but I will send out a mailing for you to my patrons and things like that. There's some privacy things we deal with, but we're happy to share our knowledge and our experience because we've been doing it for a little while and some of us have been doing it in a number of places.
Thank you. Let me return to the Zoom panelists, if I could, and same question for Bob. And on collaboration, Bob, you've been very generous with Chicago over the years and given lots of great advice. Can you talk about the role collaboration could play and has played?
Well, oddly enough, one of our best collaborations, most recent collaborations, has been with the Irish community. They asked us for help because they wanted to develop an event like ours. And it started out in a church backyard, developed into another church's field. And they most recently decided to move their games to the same place where we have our Highland Games. And they've used some of the great ideas that we've developed over the years for their own games. Now, in doing that, they give us the opportunity to have free access to all of their people. And so a lot of what we found out is a lot of the people who go to the Irish Games actually like to come to the Scottish Games because there's a lot of similar interests there. So it's working out for both of us.
We're going to come back to real life HI to quote Henry. Terry, you mentioned in an email exchange with me that you were concerned about the cost of competitions and also about climate change, having had your recent storm-related cancellation. We also in Chicago had to not cancel the event, but we had to evacuate the field for 3 years running at the very point of the mass bans. It was like clockwork. for 3 years running, I too am concerned about the effect of climate change on our games. Could you talk about cost of competitions and climate change?
I don't think you realize how expensive competitions are to have. And Brandon mentioned that there are a lot of new games. There are a lot of new games, but most new games are not having sanctioned competitions, and it's because they are way too expensive. I lose $100,000 on competitions every year. We do them all. We do, and this is not athletics. I don't count that as a competition. I count that as entertainment. This is pipe and drum, harp, fiddle, and dance. For dance this year, I paid $198 and change per competitor. And they paid me maybe $40 to $45 for their competition fees. I can't ask them to pay $200. That just we won't have competitors if that were the case. This is important. It is our mission as a nonprofit organization to bring people up, and it's going to matter to everybody. And I disagree with somebody, Brandon, I think mentioned, there aren't a lot of games. A lot of games are failing, and some of them are failing because of the cost of competitions. And so I have to find other ways to make up that money that the competitions cost me. But we need pipers, we need drummers, we need dancers. As a culture, that's what people are asking me for. I probably get 10 calls a week for people who want a piper for a funeral or a wedding or some special occasion, and I do not have the people to do it. I think I could probably pay somebody to do this full-time, probably 2 pipers full-time to do this. And so it's going to hurt us all, I think, as a culture not to have this. And I don't know what the fixes are. We've been talking to USPA. We've been working with USPA, who is the East Coast Pipe and Drum organization, to talk about how we can lower the cost, because I'm bringing over, probably 5 judges, one from Vancouver, one from California, one from Scotland, one from Canada, or like Ontario area, every year for our dance competition. Do you have sanctioned events? Yeah. So I don't know what the solution is, but I think we all need to be talking more about it.
I might have, but I offer this if it can be of help. We put on our committee the head of the Midwest Pipe Band Association,
Which runs much differently than USPA.
right.
We have actually spoken to them as well.
Jim is terrific.
Mhm.
But what he did was he organized a Zoom call without the echoes. Bagpipes echoing on a Zoom is, but he got the organizers of all of the Midwestern Highland Games.
Mhm.
And the purpose of that call was, how can we manage the costs here? And it was really productive. And indeed, the costs did come down. So that perhaps you could call your Pipe Band Association and see if they would replicate that. And I'm sure Jim would be happy to advise if it can be of help.
Thank you. I'd love that. Now we just need to get Highland Dance on the on board as
Right,
well.
And
And I don't know what to say about climate, but it's definitely affecting us. As I said, last year, we had to cancel for the first time ever in 48 years. And it meant a loss of $475,000. We have non-refundable tickets, but we chose to refund ticket money to anybody who requested it. Of course, we have to rethink that, because I can't lose money every year. Now, I've had people say to me, well, don't you have insurance? You cannot have insurance for a $2 million event. Does not exist. You cannot pay for it. Just doesn't. So we have really self-insured for a long time. So we had a pot of money set aside. It wasn't $475,000, unfortunately. I think when you think about what it's going to cost you when you have to close, you're thinking, okay, I won't have the ticket money for that day. But you're not thinking you're going to have to pay all of the expenses
Yeah.
but not have that income. So that was really kind of an eye-opening experience for us. But we have changed our ticket system, and I might recommend this to other games, so that if you come to buy one of my expensive tickets, you have the option to insure that ticket. So if we would have to cancel the games, we
Uh-huh.
would refund your money.
Good idea.
Half of the people have chosen to do that this year with our general admission tickets. We offer it for everything, our whiskey tastings, but most people, probably half, for the general admission tickets. So we're building up that pot, and I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that we don't have another cancellation before I build up that pot of money, because it's going to be a while before I get to 475,000. And interestingly, there was another hurricane this year, the weekend after our game. So if we hadn't been the same weekend that we were, if we had been the following weekend, we may have had to make the same, decision. And you just can't survive that kind of a loss year after year after year. So
Can I go to Zoom at this point and ask for any comments on collaboration, cost of events, or climate change?
I have one comment that has appeared most recently in some discussions, and that is because costs of the game are so exorbitant. Do you see the day when some of the events, some of the parts of the Highland Games will end up as a separate event? Like you could put the all the dancing and so forth as a separate event, remove it from the games to make it a more manageable games, and you'd have, you know, like 2 or 3 events a year, and still have one big event in a field like we do. You see that ever happening in the future?
Comment from Brendan, Kimberly, or Mike?
No, I thought that was a great idea, Gus, on the Rotary. I think that maybe some of that can be used, I think, for other Highland Games across the country. Look into your own cities and communities and see what are the most prolific groups there, the most successful groups, elk lodges, Rotary clubs, you name it. Just wanted to add that. Yeah, it sounds like there are plenty of challenges, and I think a lot of them are the same. Glad to hear, Brendan, that you're doing great over there. I know it was your idea to combine the Scottish and the Irish together, as we talked about 4 years ago, you were telling me. So, but I think, and I'm surprised, one of the wonderful ladies on the panel mentioning that other groups, they don't want to share any of their ideas with other games. That's appalling to me. And, you know, one of the things is being a Scot is camaraderie and helping your fellow Scot out. So I'm very surprised. If there's anything I can do, gladly, I'll help anybody. I usually get a few emails after this conference, and I'm always here to help anybody that needs help or brainstorming or whatever it might be.
We're almost at time here, so I just want to ask Brendan or Mike if you had any points you wanted to make on collaboration, costs, or climate change before I come back into the room, and we'll wrap with any comments or questions from the floor. Brendan.
I'll defer to Mike, because I think I talked about our collaboration already with the Irish, so I think that would be my contribution to the conversation. So I'm sure Mike has something more relevant.
Do you have anything you would like to cover on any of those? Okay, how about any comments from the room on Highland Games? Camilla?
One thing that we think we found is that we run, well, Michael runs a column about all the Highland Games and when they are throughout the year. And it's not about us, it's about the community. And it's one of the most popular things we have and the reactions we get. And so I think we can do more with that. people want to hear about the Highland Games and they want that news. So we're here to do that and to share that. So we have a column that we'd love you all to share. And it tells you Michael runs all the Highland Games per month. And we do a monthly calendar. And I think we need to share it because we can help support our local Highland Games, because that's what you also need. One side note that Michael mentioned the Long Island Highland Games that disappeared. They never handed over anything to the new group. So we never got an email. And then we heard through the grapevine there might be a Highland Games. So we rang them and they said, we don't have any names of any clans, any bands, anything. We've got to, this is such a rich part of our culture that we need to help each other. So my comment would be, let's collaborate more, even if we're not putting on a Highland Games, we're just going there, we're taking part in it, because we all need to help keep that culture going.
Yeah, Henry again said it best, you know, let's open a bottle of whiskey and have a drink and not a fight. Although I'm reminded of our pal Bob McWilliam from Milwaukee, who said, you know, the Scots are the only people in the world, you could lock one of them in a cupboard and they'd still come out with a black eye. Please.
Hi, I just had a quick comment to kind of build on the earlier suggestion that came out. And that is, while we don't do Highland Games as far as produce them or anything like that there, we do represent clans that go to various ones, whether they're large, whether they're small. And we've been contacted a number of times by small ones who are trying to restart ones in their community. And they don't have the resources and they're scrambling and trying to build it. And the same thing about the lack of institutional, you know, carryover. What I was wondering is, well, with you guys having larger ones and more experience in that there, have you guys considered like almost setting up like a regional area that you can have, that they can contact you and you guys will be sharing resources back and forth? It also will allow you to collaborate more, make sure that you're not in direct competition with each other, you know, if it's too close together kind of thing. And that would help build that camaraderie part, but it would also release some of the strain and pressure on you, knowing that there are additional resources that you can tap if you need to at last minute for some of the larger games. And also best practices would naturally be able to migrate back and forth. Just a suggestion.
Great point. I'd be happy to talk to any of those groups that are looking to get games up and running. If we could, I'm sure the panelists here invite them to the conference next year.
And I will say one of the benefits for me, I'm a judge in the Mid-Atlantic region for athletics, and we go to and judge at probably 12 games out of the year, and we get a lot of requests for new festivals looking for athletics, and we also help them out with plans, with vendors, with all of that. So we're all willing to help.
Thanks, Alexandria. John.
Yeah, I have a question about the Association of Scottish Games and Festivals, which you mentioned, Alex. That's a professional association for games and festivals. And obviously there's value there because many of you are members. I don't know all of them, but I know many are members.
Yeah.
What are they doing, or what could they do better to help you share best practices, share data, share talents, or whatever the sharing needs to be?
I will confess I haven't been active. That's a question for Heather, who's been active with ASGF.
I think that.
So the Association of Games and Festivals was our inspiration for getting a calendar going, because it was only their members that they were listing, but they could be so much bigger and more active.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone that's I'm on the board for that group. And I think something that we all struggle with is time, right? So each of those folks has their own games that they're running. I think they're doing the best they can. They have instituted kind of like a quarterly get together, and it's usually on Zoom because there's so many of us that have games that are far apart from each other. So they do Zoom calls, and there is time for networking on those calls. I know I've seen Brendan's face on a few of those. I know a few of you guys have also participated on those. And it allows you to kind of ask the question as a games to a group of other games organizers. Hey, what's the best practice here? Or I'm really struggling here. Do you have resources?
One of the things you offer is wonderful insurance, and that is such a huge headache for everybody. So can you tell us a little bit more about that very great service that the Games and Festivals does?
Sure, without sounding too much like a insurance commercial. I'm not a gecko, sorry guys. Um, they do offer insurance if you're a member of the Association of Scottish Games and Festivals. It's a relatively affordable membership for your games. We're not trying to put anybody out of business, but we do need to keep some income coming so we can keep offering speakers and things like that. They use Caliph Insurance, and if you're a member, you do get some pretty guided help. I would say their team has been working with festivals nonstop for many years at this point, so they're used to it. If you say, I have caber tossers, they're not like, what's a caber? And you have to explain it. Like, that gets old after a while. So it's really nice that they know what goes into a festival and a games, and you're able to talk to them and kind of tailor your insurance to what it is you're putting on.
And they are through Lloyd's of London, I believe, and they are reasonable and a big reason to be with them.
Can I bring this session to a close? I think you're up next, Camilla. But before I do, could I ask for you to join me in thanking Kimberly, Mike, Brendan, Bob, Terry, and Alex for their time.